Good afternoon, everybody. This is Bonnie Vandermeulen, Training Coordinator for Wisconsin Facets. On behalf of our entire Wisconsin Facets staff, I'd like to thank you for joining us this afternoon. Today's webinar on executive function will begin in just a minute. Our presenter for today's webinar is Eva Kabinski. Eva is a school administrative consultant on the special education team at the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction. She provides training and support in the areas as adapted physical education, assessment, working with medical professionals, attendance, pre-service educator training program reviews, cross-categorical licensing, and the unique needs of American Indian students with IEPs. Eva is the program consultant for the areas of orthopedic impairment, other health impairment, and traumatic brain injury. Ms. Kabinski has an MS in educational psychology from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. It is my great pleasure today to introduce to you Eva Kabinski. Eva?
Thank you, Bonnie. You make me sound so, I think, experienced might be the word. Good afternoon, everybody. As Bonnie said, I'm Eva Kabinski, and I'm a consultant on the special education team at DPI. And I'm very pleased to be here with you, and I'm pleased that it sounds like we've got a great audience today. And I just wanted to give you a little bit more about that, about who I am. My primary training is as a school psychologist, and I've had the privilege to work in the Sun Prairie, Waterloo, Monona Grove, McFarland, and Menominee Indian school districts over the years. I've also worked as both a training consultant and assistant director for a federally funded technical assistance center, technical assistance center at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and I provided supports in the various areas related to No Child Left Behind to 6 states, to the Bureau of Indian Education Programs located in those states, plus the U.S. Department of Education at a national level. And I really enjoyed that because it gave me a chance to stretch some of my school psych background. I always say that's probably, I consider that to be the best training to give you lots of opportunities within education. And you know, I've been at DPI since 2006, and I still consider it one of the best decisions I've ever made. And a part of it is because I so enjoy getting to know parents and educators and, you know, just folks that care so much about students with IEPs and with disabilities. And I especially, because of some of the program areas I'm responsible for, which includes both orthopedic impairment, other health impairment, traumatic brain injury, the issue of executive function comes up more often than not for students with difficulties in those areas. So today you're kind of going to get an introduction to executive function skills, and there is a reason for that. In the past, Bonnie's had some really fantastic presenters, including a professor from UW-Whitewater who did just a lovely presentation on, you know, both kind of what executive function skills are and then how they were or weren't demonstrated in her son who has some neurological differences. And you know, I'm not to that level because I unfortunately do not have a child, but I've worked with quite a few kids over the years, and I know this is something that frequently comes up but doesn't always get recognized. So I'm really appreciative that Bonnie and Wisconsin Facets are letting me share this information. And it's something that I know that our team is considering doing some further work on so that we can really develop some tools and supports for both parents and educators so that we can really support students who might have some difficulties in these areas. So what I plan on talking about today is kind of a definition and description of executive function skills, how to foster their development, and with some examples, and then where to document the information about them in the IEP. And it's this, as I shared with Bonnie, number one, I've had a lot of coffee today, so I will try to make sure I don't talk too fast. But I also had, I actually had to take stuff out because there's so much out there that I want to share. And like I said, that's one of those things that we're hoping to develop some further materials and resources that will be available to you. In the meanwhile, I do have a resource and reference list that you have not received yet. I'm in the process of making sure that all of the links that I have on it are active, and that so that that you're not ending up somewhere with nothing there. And once I finish that, which I'm hoping to do this afternoon, I will forward it to Bonnie and she will send it out to everybody that's signed up for this webinar. But it's certainly not going to be comprehensive. It's just going to be some things that I've found and used. And I am always looking for further supports or resources, so you're welcome to share them. And also at the end, you'll see my contact information in case you want to contact me and talk about this or share something. So before we do that, I do have to say that one of the things that I consider an extreme benefit to working at the department is that we do have state superintendents who really care about the issues of educational equity. And it started with Libby Burmaster, and then Dr. Tony Evers, and currently with Carolyn Stanford Taylor. And we are really trying to make sure that part of our message is that every student has access to the as it says here, to the educational resources and rigor they need at the right moment in their education across race, gender, ethnicity, languages, disabilities, sexual orientation, family background, and/or family income. Because we do know that those factors seem to impact how well our students do. And that shouldn't be the case. We really want to make sure that we are providing the necessary supports that they might need. So related to that, one of the things that we've done over the past several years is to develop the College and Career Ready IEP system. And what's really important is that we want to make sure that we're not going into an IEP not just looking at, who is this, is a student just a label, or can we look at other things? Do we have those high expectations for them? Do we incorporate and use culturally responsive practices? Do we really work to develop those relationships with students so that they really feel like they're part of the school and not just shunted off to the side? We also want to really encourage the family and community engagement in our students' lives and in their success, and then just a collective responsibility. No child is one teacher's responsibility. That child is the responsibility of all the educators that are in that building or in that district. And that is whether they do or don't have an IEP, whether they might receive free and reduced lunches, or they're coming from greater resources and perhaps wealth. We want all of our students to have no barriers to being college and career ready when they leave our schools. So again, that's one of the things that I think we're very lucky to have in this state, is that emphasis. So having done my that little disclaimer and didn't go too far onto my soapbox, I want to talk to you about executive function. As I mentioned, I've had this interest, and part of it is related to the fact that I was a capable student when I was in school. I knew what the teachers wanted, and I knew how to produce what they were expecting to get. And because of that, I was part of a trial program for exceptional students that were being, or for students that were being academically successful. And I remember one of the things that they taught us were these various strategies that, it's like, oh, wow, this is really great. This helps me feel more organized. This allows me to see what I need to do. Basically teaching us some of the strategies and skills that you would see within executive functioning. And uh, and again, it was wonderful. But I also remember thinking at the time, well, okay, I'm a capable student. I'm getting the grades that I want. I'm getting my work done. I know what to do when I don't know what to do, and this is all just gravy. But there are students I see that don't have that knowledge. Why aren't they getting that instruction? And it's something that I've asked along the way as I've been in education. And I think part of it is because we don't we don't necessarily understand that this is something you have to learn. It just seems to kind of show up. So that when we don't see the effort that's needed to be included, that can make it a little bit more mysterious and or just expected that students will just pick this up on their own. So when we talk about executive functioning, excuse me, I ended up advancing it. These are mental processes that we develop over the course of our childhood into adulthood, and it's a set of mental skills that we need to help us do things with such as complete tasks and interact appropriately with others by controlling our behavior. And we, I know that teachers would say things to me sometimes about students like, everybody else knows how to do this. Why are they not? Why don't they get this? They never have their things with them, and we've talked about this repeatedly. Well, so I think sometimes what happens is that we just expect students to pick these skills up without recognizing that there are some steps that have to happen. None of us are born with executive function skills. Not one of us. We all learn them. But there are things that we are going to be, depending on how we grew up and who we had around us, that are going to either help us get these skills better or that might interfere with their development. Why do we care about executive function skills? And I'm switched to EF because it gets kind of long to type. They are crucial to learning and development, both academic learning and functional learning, and just the development of who we are as people. These skills enable us to show positive behaviors, or at least the behaviors that are valued by most, at this time, most of society. And it also helps us make healthy choices. So they're a good thing, but they're not, again, necessarily something everybody gets. So here are some things that you might think about. Well, where do they come from? Do I use executive function skills? Don't all children just have them? And isn't this difficulty that only kids with autism or ADHD have? So yeah, no, this shows up in a lot of places. I personally see the impact. I suffer from periodic depression when I'm having a lot of life stressors, and I know that the first thing that goes out of that happens is that my working memory just does not work. Luckily, I now recognize that, so I know that when I'm feeling that way, I need to write everything down. So for me, that's a strategy to address that issue that I need some supports to help me remember things, make sure things are done on time, following timelines. And no, all children do not have them. But again, probably most of you do have at least some, if not all, of the executive function skills. They do tend to show up in terms of, well, here, uh, they do start developing at around age 2, and in most cases they'll be fully developed by the time you're in your 30s. Okay, so where do executive function skills come from? So again, as I mentioned, they're not something you're born with. It's not necessarily an indicator of intelligence, and it's not connected to any one disability. Matter of fact, you might not have a a long-term disability, but you might have had some acute situations that interfered with picking these up. Uh, or again, we do see it across those disabilities that have a neurological component. So again, we're not born with them, but we pretty much most everybody can learn them. Uh, excuse me. Let me go back to that. Okay, one thing that I do want to mention is that when we do look at some of our students, and this can be something we start seeing when they're in their early childhood age to entering school, being in the middle and high school, is that some students do need more support than others to develop the skills. In and this could be because if children do not get what they need from their relationship with adults and the conditions in their environment uh, uh, may be toxic, seeing toxic stress, their skill development can be seriously delayed or impaired. Adverse environments resulting from neglect, abuse, and/or violence may expose children to toxic stress. And again, that's something that we've been talking about recently in terms of how that can impact, how students do. There's even some research that indicates that it might actually change some of our brain architecture. And we really want, we see that it can disrupt brain architecture and impair the development of executive function skills. So again, this is some of, again, we're looking at that there are things that happen in a child's environment and in their life experiences that could get in the way of their development of these executive function skills. And depending on what that factor is, that may be something that they're always going to have to work on. But then it also may be we just need to reteach it or teach it more explicitly. So when we're talking about development, when we have children in that early infancy age, they what we want them to see, or what we see them doing that kind of provides the foundation for them, is to learning to pay attention and also developing relationships with responsive caretakers. So if they're having trouble learning how to pay attention because there's something else that's interfering, or because their neurology is somewhat different, and that's, the sensation of the fabric against their skin gets in the way of their ability to focus on things other than that, you might not see the development the way we would expect. And having a positive relationship with responsive caretakers that, feed that, help them with that, provide some certain experiences, can really help with the development. So for example, one of the things that we tend to play with young children is a game of peekaboo. And what that does is it helps to lay a foundation of working memory and self-control as the baby anticipates the surprise. At first they're kind of like, what is this human doing in front of me? It's kind of weird. But then as they start getting, seeing that this is a positive social direction, they begin to anticipate it. And as they start to mature in developing these skills, you'll notice that they might wait longer before reacting to the surprise. Or maybe they're going to be anticipating it and react more strongly. That's all showing you that you, even just by playing that game with a child, you are impacting their future skills. When we get more into childhood, the teenage years, the ways that we can help positively impact the development of executive function skills is the establishment of routines. Uh, Perhaps breaking big tasks into smaller ones, and then playing games that promote imagination, role playing, following rules, and controlling impulses. So, again, back when I first started working in special education, one of the things that we would do is take a look at something that a student was having trouble doing and do what's called the task analysis. And rather than having one big task they had to do, we'd break it down into smaller ones and then really just start with one part and then add more and add more. So they're not overwhelmed with just one large task. They've had several smaller ones that they can be successful at and not get frustrated and stop doing it. So again, there, we tend to do some of this automatically because that's also how we're wired to do it. But some students who have not had that responsive early or had responsive relationships from their caretakers in their earlier ages may need to have this repeated more often, or maybe they need to have it even simpler. These are all things that, we know that children learn well from playing games. So, again, anything that they're doing that promotes their imagination, role playing, following, you know, but also perhaps having some structure that requires that they follow rules and, having a positive outcome from following the rules, as well as controlling their impulses. And again, some kids may not be at that point. You have to start back earlier and build up to it. But these are all things that can be taught. So, what's happening when we see them using these skills? Part of it is that they're needing to use their working memory because they have to figure out what they need to do and remember how they did it before, or figure something out. They also have to have mental flexibility. If they're too rigid in how they approach things, there's only one way to do things. That everything has to happen in a certain order. That can stall them in terms of getting things done, working with other students, reacting to stressors and surprises, and then self-control. If a student doesn't have self-control, it's going to be hard for them to both learn and then express these various executive function skills. So these are three things that you're going to want to look at if you see a student that doesn't seem to have a strong foundation or very successful executive function skills. So when it does not work, we're talking about something that is called an executive function disorder. So this is more likely something that you'll see, you might see this in a student that's going through an evaluation, or it might come from a medical report from a medical doctor. Things such as neurological disorders, mental health and behavioral disorders, they can interfere with that working memory, that mental flexibility, and that self-control. So, so it makes some sense because, we're looking at our working memory, that governs our ability to retain and manipulate distinct pieces of information over short periods of time. When we're talking again about that mental flexibility, it helps us sustain or shift our attention in response to different demands, or to even apply different rules in different settings. And then the self-control again enables us to set priorities and resist impulsive actions or responses. And those neurological disorders, as I mentioned before, could interfere with that. Mental health issues might interfere. Yeah, we when we're not, as I talk about this, you might be thinking, well, gee, maybe this is like its own mental health disorder, like depression or obsessive compulsive disorder. No, it's not. Right now, the DSM-5, which is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual that defines various disorders, says that it is not its own mental health disorder, but it's symptomatic. It's a symptom of other neurological, mental health, and behavioral disorders, which can make sense because we're saying that there's something that's interfering with that working memory, with that mental flexibility, with that self-control. But it's in of itself, it's not a mental health disorder. So when we're looking at those different neurological, mental health, and behavioral disorders, there's different points of this whole process that they may impact, or they may just, it may look just the same. You just have to remember that almost no two people will look exactly alike. So you really do need to dig and find out what's going on there. What skills do they have and what skills do they not have? Just saying that they have a certain disability does not mean that automatically means that they'll have an executive function disorder or difficulty in developing those skills. But it might be something that's a potential issue, and it's something to be aware of. So again, when we're talking about an executive function disorder, the skills that might be impacted could include self-awareness, the ability to inhibition of inappropriate behaviors, the nonverbal working memory, verbal working memory, emotional self-regulation, self-motivation, planning, and problem solving. So again, as I sit here, I've got, yep, I remember that student. That's what I saw in that student. Or maybe I saw 2 or 3 of these in another student. Main thing is that we look at students individually, not by their label. Taking a look at what we, through observation and other assessment, determine other disability-related needs. So one of the things, I apologize. I keep hitting the wrong button and it goes too far. So I have to offer this disclaimer. This screener is something that's from the website Attitude, which is a resource for families and students who have attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. It is something that they've developed. It's a 13-question screener that is more for, I think, kind of to help parents organize their thoughts around their child's needs and kind of give them an idea if maybe this is something they need to get further evaluated. Just because you might answer a certain way on this does not automatically mean that your child has executive function disorders, but it might be something to say, okay, we're seeing these things happening. These are needs that are that are interfering with the student's ability to be successful in the general education setting. Maybe we need to take a further look. So this is, again, just something that you might consider if you're thinking, does your child need further evaluation? There are other formal assessments. There are assessments that can be administered in the medical or therapeutic setting. There are also some that I know that I used that weren't necessarily called this, but that did look at executive function when I was working as a school psychologist. This is where, if you're not sure, you might want to again talk to either a medical professional or a neuropsychologist, or perhaps with your school psychologist in the school district. And this, just because I included this, does not imply any endorsement of the screener by either the department or myself. It's just for informational purposes only, just to kind of give you an idea of what might be some of those questions that you'd want to look at. So let's say that you've kind of identified that there are some skills that your child or student is not being successful with. What can you do? Well, one of the things that I did include, and that if you take a look, it's one of the downloadable documents that are provided, is a executive function worksheet from Attitude. And what it does is it lists certain skills that are related to being to those executive function, and it's not by any means comprehensive. And I want to make sure I say that because you may actually be seeing things that are related to executive function skills that aren't listed on that sheet, and that's important to recognize. What this does is these are the more common types of situations and difficulties that students have. And then what it does is it has a series of possible interventions under each one. And as I look through it, it at least gives you a starting point for some of these, but there's also things I could think of that might be, depending on how the student responds to things, that I would probably do differently. But it's a good starting point, and it might be something that if I was working with a student who is having some of these issues and I wanted to kind of get a response in terms of what the teachers were seeing in the classroom, this could be something that you might use, have you know, each IEP team member that knows the student fill it out and then indicate what they think might be, based on their experience with the student, what might be some possible interventions to try out with the student. It's, again, this is just something that is a potential tool or resource. I'm not saying that at no point are we saying you have to use this. I'm not endorsing it. I'm merely offering it for informational purposes. So I do want to share, for example, a couple of examples from the sheet. So let's say that you have a student or your child is constantly losing their homework, and maybe the cat ate it, or maybe it got accidentally used for lining the bottom of a pot or something when you're transplanting a plant, and suddenly the homework is not there. So here are some possible interventions that they listed. Number one, if you're the educator and you're just not getting the homework because it seems to be missing, number one, consider notifying the parents of the missing assignments. Maybe even develop a structure where you let them know if something hasn't been turned in. Another possible intervention would be that parents would keep all finished papers. They would review them with the child and then submit any, help the child submit any missing work. That way, because again, sometimes just moving from the kitchen table into the backpack, a million things can happen and suddenly it's gone. So, these are just, again, possible ideas. Those of you who are educators and parents, you may have some much better possible interventions, but this is a starting point to provoke discussion. Another one would be perhaps if your student was having a difficult time in terms of controlling his or her emotions. Uh, they might be acting impulsively, talking a lot, or daydreaming. So, what are some things you could do? Well, and again, this should only be done after a lot of data has been collected, shared with a medical professional, something that that the parents could discuss if medication might be helpful. This is not something that you can require. This is a decision that should be made by the parent and a medical professional. Uh, so let's see that they're having a hard time, remembering to raise their hand before they talk. So you could take a picture of the child raising their hand, tape that to their desk as a visual reminder. If that doesn't work, take a picture of their best friend with their hand up as a visual reminder. Sometimes that becomes, more fun for them and maybe more memorable. Maybe you need to provide the student with more opportunities to talk more. I was that kid. I got frequently on my report card, I had notes saying that Eva, is doing well academically, but she does like to talk a lot. My mom, several years back, my mom pulled that out, and after I was working in school, said, "Oh, look, it's still you." So, I would have loved to have other opportunities to talk. And some of the suggestions might be that you ask that student to read the morning bulletin. Or maybe that one of the things that that student might do as perhaps as a volunteer activity or as a maybe a reward is getting the chance to read stories to younger children so that they can get that energy and verbal energy out in a positive way as opposed to getting in trouble for constantly interrupting or speaking out of turn. You know, the main thing is to use what you know about your child and use that as a way to help you figure out what might work. So you've had your IEP meeting. It might be a review revised meeting, or it might be a formal evaluation. You might have actually done this as part of an evaluation or a reevaluation. So what are you going to do with this information? Well, first thing, you know, one of the things that we are really stressing, it's been in the law for several decades, we're not supposed to just evaluate children for a label. We are required by IDEA to do a comprehensive evaluation of the student that allows you to identify their disability-related learning needs. So, you know, part of that happens when you all get together to determine what kinds of assessments need to be done. What kind of information do you already have? What are some areas that you've seen potential problems and issues? And, you know, what are you within that, you know, don't necessarily say, okay, well, we have to show this and this to qualify. Yes, we need to qualify them to get them in, but then we also still need to make sure we don't forget to address all of their disability related learning needs. And that's really important. When we're talking about this, it is important that we have some data. It could be observational data, it could be from a screener, it could be from behavioral checklists. There's lots of potential sources for that information, but we have to base this on what we know about the child and what we're seeing happen. So when we get to the IEP, we have the I-4 linking form. And this is where we're going to take the information we know and what's the student doing and what are the areas where they're having difficulty. And then what are their overall disability related needs, and then developing the goals and so on. So here are some areas where I would probably put some information in. For example, and again, this may be called something different in your school district's form. Uh, I don't know that I have not seen recently every one of our information management systems, such as Skyward or uh, again, I'm not going to remember all of them. You know, they may have some of these either with additional titles or it may not be in the same order. But as I look at the model forms that we have posted on our website, I'd go to the I-4, and again, there might be other places in here than what I mentioned where you could include this information. But the main thing is I want to make sure that we have a reason for why we consider this a need and why we're addressing it the way that we are. So probably the first place is when we go to the current academic achievement and functional performance, which is, you know, part of the section that's reviewing and revisiting or including information about the student, we want to say, well, where are they at right now? What are we seeing at this point in time? And we're not talking 3 years ago, we're not talking necessarily 3 months ago. We want to talk 3 months up to now too. We want it to be recent enough that it's pertinent. So I would probably take a look at putting some information about it, depending on how these executive function skill needs are distinguishing themselves. If we're seeing them more in a learning setting, I would probably put them under the present level of academic achievement in terms of what we're seeing, what kind of data we've gotten from this. But it also could fit under functional performance. And it really is important then to put down, you know, what kind of data it is, where it is, and what conclusions you've drawn from it. Then you could also take a look and probably discuss whether this is a special factor. Does this result in behavior that's impeding their learning or that of other children? If it is, then you need to describe those behavioral needs. And if you haven't indicated it in those other sections, again, what are we basing this on that this is a need? What are the specific parts of these skills that seem to be problematic? But it might not necessarily, again, it depends on if it's causing a behavior that impedes learning. Then you also would want to take a look at and think about whether it's something, how serious it is and how much this impacts their ability related to their disability, and on how it impacts their involvement and progress in the general education curriculum. If you have a student that's having a hard time controlling their behavior to the point where they're not in the classroom very often and they're not receiving instruction, that's interfering. That's something that's impacting their access, involvement, and progress. So that would be something that under the effects of the disability you could document. And then you also would need to consider it to be you develop that summary of the various learning disability related learning needs, and excuse me, and then list and number them. And then what you're going to do is that when you are developing the measurable annual goals, it needs to be in at least one of them, or that needs to be a factor in at least one of them. And you again will have to put down what your baseline data is, develop what you're going to, what the targets are, how you're going to evaluate progress, and again, so then it depends again on how you collected that information, how you're going to collect it in the future. And then you'd also determine if addressing these needs is something that needs to either be done through specially designed instruction, or if there are supplementary aids and services that will address this, and then include that within the program summary. And we just want to make sure that we have that information, and that you have a plan in place, and that there is, that it's not just kind of like, oh, we're going to teach them and that's it. We want to teach them. We want to make sure that we know how they're progressing. We want to know if they've met the goal related to it, if they've actually picked up the skill, and if they're demonstrating it, in what environments. All those things that we do for any type of um, intervention or accommodation that we use to address a student's individual disability-related learning needs. So, again, this is just kind of an overview today. There are many resources out there. There are many trainings. It's something that when Katie Berg does her supporting neurodiverse students, she'll talk about these things, sometimes directly by name, and other times as part of a constellation of things that you're addressing. So there are resources out there, and I will be forwarding some of those to you after this webinar. But in the meanwhile, and this is what parents can do, educators can do, to establish those routines. When everything seems kind of jumbled and you maybe aren't sure what you need to do, having an established routine can be very helpful and a good touch point for a student. The other thing is that we model social behaviors that we want to see. And that will be both through showing them, doing some explicit instruction, but then also one thing I've found, and these are especially those students who are like, I'm never going to do what you tell me, or they're just really not wanting to be compliant. I have found that if you pretend to talk to yourself or you talk to another adult within earshot of the students and just kind of say, oh, yeah, I'm just having the worst time getting myself organized for this task I have to do. I'm trying to think of where I need to start. Well, I guess I could, what works for me is that I write down the steps and then I can decide which step comes first. And, just kind of talk through the process. The things that we kind of might do somewhat automatically, I've never had it fail. If you act like you're either forgetting that the student is there and you're talking to yourself, or maybe that's something that you don't necessarily want them to hear. I have had more students who will then bring up later and go, yeah, you were talking about that, I think I need help with that, or they might start to use some of those strategies. Not that you have to be sneaky about it. There were just a couple of students I had to do that for, but that's one way that you can also do that, because we all take information in different ways, and sometimes hearing somebody talk about themselves is going to help them see it better than if you're talking about what they have to do. We also, and this would be part of that too, is that we really want to make sure that we create and maintain the supportive, reliable relationships with students. It's especially students who might be coming from a situation with a lots of toxic stress or a lot of surprises and changes. Having a supportive, reliable environment. Yeah, that teacher listens to me, and I know she's going to be there every day unless she has a dental appointment. But I can, and I know that even if I don't have to go talk to her, at least I have that person. That person's there. And in this one, I love this part. Encourage creative play. Unfortunately, over the years, as we've gotten more focused on test scores and making sure that, which again, we want to see students learn, we want to see them meet those academic goals. But I think sometimes what we forget is that these are kids, and kids learn the best when it comes to play or things that they're enjoying and that let them be creative. And then also, support those social connections and make sure that they're appropriate, that we're not, that they are being supportive of each other and kind to each other. Those things help them. We also need to teach students how to cope with stress. Especially now, things have been so up and down this past year, and things have not been what they knew and what they want. They haven't been seeing their friends. We're hearing a lot of kids are coming back to school or are suffering at home with just a lot of stress. And that's not to say that parents and educators don't have that too. You do, but it's important that you address your stress so that you can help them address theirs. And if and I think that that's something that we need to model for students, because if we're telling them to not be stressed and then we're running around being all stressed, that's not really, they'll notice that disparity. So again, deal with your own stress. Perhaps have a few stress reducing massages or spa days, things that help you feel less stressful, and then help them become, figure out ways to be less stressed themselves. One of the ways to do that would be to encourage vigorous exercise. Uh, no matter what your kids tell you, video games do not count. Maybe a brisk game on the Wii might do that, but uh, it's real easy to kind of get caught up in things, and you're not having to do that as much creativity when it comes to most video games. So figure out ways that they can get that stress release through some vigorous physical exercise. And again, this is also related to the fact that kids do need those physical breaks, and we really need to make sure we don't lose recess when it comes to kids, because they need that time. Uh, and then as they're growing older, we want to encourage self-direction of their own actions, uh, but with less and less adult supervision. And this is something that can be hard sometimes, because parents become their child's protectors, they're advocates. We as educators do what we can to try and help them and get them to be successful. But you know what? As they grow older, they're not necessarily going to have that kind of support in the real world. So it's really important for them to try these things out, to learn and be self-directed. And when we still can help them and reteach it and reinforce it, once they get out into the real world and they don't have that, it's it's just going to be more difficult. So we really want them to not only have that self-direction, but to recognize that they have it and to really value it. So that's something that, again, we can do to help encourage the development of the appropriate executive function skills. So there you've got a whole bunch of stuff in a relatively short period of time. I hope that most of it made sense, but if not, I'm happy to answer some questions. Bonnie, do we have any at this point in time?
We have a couple, Eva.
Sure.
So I'll start with the first one that I have here.
Okay.
How can you, as a parent, tell school personnel that your child's issues of executive function are not willful behavior and have to be addressed differently?
Yeah. Okay. Well, again, I mean, part of it is to take a look at what's going on when it comes to that behavior. That's where really taking a look at what's causing that behavior and then determining what we want to see instead. The way that we do when we do a functional behavioral analysis and then try to develop other behaviors that will take the place of the behavior we don't want. And some of that might be saying, yeah, this child is not willfully losing their homework. They're just distracted. And we haven't helped them put the right structure in place to make sure they can remember. Maybe they need to have a cue from the parent asking them, where is your homework? Maybe you have a special folder that follows the homework to the table and then has to be put in, the work's put into the folder and has to be put into the backpack where the parent will double check. There's things, and then see how that works. I think that sometimes it is easy to think that a child is just being willful unless we can kind of go back and say, where did the interruption come? Have we seen this behavior before and now we're suddenly it's come back again after we got rid of it? All of those things mean just, becoming, we want to be an expert in that child and depending on their age, get their input, but don't automatically assume that it's something that the child is doing to either get your goat or just be irritated. They may have no idea that they didn't do it, or they may not have that enough understanding of themselves. They don't have that metacognitive understanding to know when it happened and why. That's where we as adults can help by, just, it may take several times. Let's practice this. Let me watch you, tonight and see what happens. And then be kind of that helpful guide to that student. So if it does happen, share that information with the school and describe what you did and what happened. Uh, but again, it may be just that's not the right person that you need to talk to. Maybe there's somebody else that you need to talk to and share and you ask them to help you problem solve.
Okay, we have another question for
Mhm.
you. Are there resources for teaching executive function? And then the person goes on to say, I asked this to be included in my daughter's IEP, and the school psychologist said that she was not aware of any tools to teach this.
Yeah, there are a lot of resources out there. It is a question of just taking a look at what they have. I think that I would suggest taking a look at once I send you the resources, see what they say and see if that's what you're looking for. If not, you're always welcome to get back to me or have the school psychologist get back to me, and we can try and find some other resources, or whoever's going to be doing the teaching, and we can always try and find some other resources that address it. We just have to remember that not every child's going to have the same executive functioning skills what they're having difficulty with. They may just have a few, or they may have all, but it has to, going back, we're looking at the individual student's needs. So yeah, but yes, there's things out there, some really great things out there.
Another question that we have relates to your information on self-direction. One of the issues that children with executive function issues display
Hmm.
is the fact that they are not self-starters.
Hmm.
So how can we talk to them about being self-directed when we can't get them to do anything?
Well, that's a good one. It's kind of a question, you kind of have to figure out what's the cause of it. Is it because something, there's something more rewarding than starting it? Do they not know how to start it? Uh, are they even aware that you want them to start it? So you need to take a look, I kind of have to take a step back and say, okay, well, not only what is happening here, when is it happening, but do we know why? Does the student know why? And that's part again of that, this isn't something where you can just take a look at a child and say, oh yeah, I'm sure they have this, this, and this. You can fill out checklists and screeners, and you still might not know all of them. So part of it is kind of working with the student to decipher or determine what's going on. And if you're still not able to get them, say, to start something academic, then what you might do is find something, if if he or she has a real strong interest in something that they do like to do, then what you can do is you can help them learn how to, figure out the steps to doing that, identify them, and then, show how they actually go through it, and then see if you can transfer some of that self-knowledge and understanding to the task that you want them to do.
We have one other question for you, and
Mhm.
that is how about executive function in adults who have a traumatic brain injury?
Yep. Oh, yeah. Well, especially if that traumatic brain injury has impacted their working memory. Yeah, there are a lot of adults who end up being identified as having attention deficit disorder or some other mental health issue or neurological issue, or who have had, are recovering from a traumatic brain injury. And so there are this it's never too late to learn. It may just take more practice and more repetition. And again, depending on what part of the brain was injured and whether there might be some things that unfortunately won't be coming back. So then what you may need to do is determine if there's some others, if there's something else that can be done, or, is there something that can be done using technology? And I do know that I believe that there are, that there, at least in this area, there had been some adult kind of coaches, life coaches, that would focus on things like that. It's something where, if you had a traumatic brain injury, talk to your neurologist and see if they have anybody they recommend, or because I'm sure you're not the first person as an adult who discovers they don't have this. But again, yes, you certainly can and should take a look at, and there are websites also that address these issues for adults and not just children.
And then one last question, if we can squeeze one in
Sure.
here. It relates to putting these problems into the IEP, and you mentioned
Mhm.
the I-4.
Yeah.
If a parent is concerned specifically about some of these particular issues,
Hmm.
should they also list it in the present level of functioning, or where else would you again identify a place to
Yep.
put some of these concerns?
Yes. Well, there is a section that where it asks about parents' concerns. Let me just make sure I find the right page. Information about the student. Unfortunately, the pages of the document I was using Oh, okay. So in the I-4, in section D, or it's item D, it says concerns of the parents or family. So describe the concerns of parents, family for enhancing the education of the student. This may include concerns about reading achievement, early language communication or early literacy skills, other academic areas, health enhancing physical activities, social and about keeps going on. So that's a section that, number one, I sure hope every IEP has that. You know, we value and need the input of the parents regarding the concerns they may have, and we're still we haven't always been as successful as we could be in the past, but know that, you know, again, parents are an integral part of an IEP team, and that is another place that if the parent brings this up, absolutely, it should be in there. And if it doesn't happen, there's ways to amend, you know, to ask them to include an additional document that expresses the parent's concerns and what they would like to see. And, you know, but again, there's a section here where it really that they really should make sure information is included.
Okay, well, that is the end of our questions for now. Do you have any closing thoughts, Eva?
Well, again, I'm just happy that we had so many registrants, because I do think this is a very important issue, and it's and I'm also thinking, you know, this shouldn't just be for students with IEPs. You know, I'm sure that there are, you know, some students that have not been identified as having a disability who might have might not have strong skills in these areas. So, you know, it's kind of something that I would watch out for all students. And if you've got a student that's doing really well, great. You know, that's great. But if there's somebody who's not doing as well, that might be something that needs to be perhaps taught to all students, or be explicitly taught to a subgroup of students. So, but again, thank you all for taking the time out of your day to listen, and please feel free to contact me or anybody on the special education team if you have questions and would like some assistance.
Well, thank you so much, Eva, for your great presentation today. I'm sure that people have learned some more about executive functions, and that if they have other questions, we appreciate the fact that you're willing to further talk with them about it,
Oh,
and that
absolutely.
we will be sending out that other informational sheet that you will be providing to
Yes.
them.
And then Bonnie, you and I had talked about the fact that I will be doing another workshop in March related to using how to use medical information during an evaluation. So if that's something that you're interested in, Bonnie's really good about sending out those registration forms. That's another one that if you can stand listening to me, I will be doing in March.
Okay, well, again, thank you so very much, Eva.
Thanks,
This
Bonnie.
concludes our webinar for today. We'd like to thank all of you for joining us. Please be reminded that Wisconsin Facets has over 100 scheduled trainings and webinars for the year 2021. Please check out our website calendar and register for any of the upcoming trainings that may be of interest to you. And also, please watch for the short evaluation that will be coming to you immediately following our live presentation today. Thank you again to everybody for your participation. Have a great day, stay safe, and stay warm. Thank you.